So welcome everyone to Voices with Raveki. I'm very excited about this trilogue that's about to emerge between us. I don't know where it's going to go, and that's so exciting. How did this happen? Well, here are my two of my most favorite partners in crime, Jordan Hall and Gregg Henriques. And Jordan and I have been doing a long-running series on really trying to get clear about the kind of cognition and the kind of wisdom that's going to be needed to confront the phase transition that we're going through. Gregg and I just finished an excellent series of discussions on consciousness, and we're going to enter into one on the nature of the self. And so Gregg sort of had this, well, we had a joint insight, and then he had an insight on the off of it. And by his own admission, it was a little bit hypomanic, and he was saying things, he was texting Jordan and I and emailing us about this sort of idea. I'll bring you up what the idea is in a sec, but what we'd like to do here is to try and articulate and explicate this idea and also help maybe actualize some of its emergent potentiality. So first of all, I want to welcome Jordan and Gregg. Thanks guys for being here. It's always
beautiful, man. Thanks so much.
Okay, so I'm going to start with something in Jordan's wheelhouse, and then we're going to move. So the topic, the thing, the entity, but it's somewhat nebulous by Gregg's own admission, is he came up with this construct of wisdom energy. And then I said, I think I understand you. That sounds like chi or ki within Taoism, but I'm not sure. And then there's been some exchanges. But I don't want to start with wisdom energy. I want to start with a notion that's more on Jordan's wheelhouse and see if we can start there and move towards this. And so where I want to start with is I want to point out something that I've thought about and reflecting, because I've been reflecting on this repeatedly and over again because Jordan's a presence in my mind, as you can imagine, and his notion of coherence. And one of the things, and I've been trying various mappings, coherence, dialogos, wisdom, these various things, and that's been part of the ongoing discussion between Jordan and I. And what I want to pick up on now here is not so much the referent as the vehicle, because I take it that Jordan is using this term in a somewhat ostensive fashion. He's trying to extend to something that we don't fully grok yet. That's been what I've seen him convey to me repeatedly. He's nodding right now, so that's a good sign. And so I'm trying to pick up on the vehicle of conveyance here. And the thing about coherence for me, and that what always made it so resonant for me, is it's like this, it's this double aspect metaphor. I mean, on one sense, with coherence, there's obviously, an allusion to logical coherence and making sense and having an ordered intelligibility. But there's also an allusion to electromagnetic coherence, right? And this kind of affordance of a kind of coordination of information and causation. And it was really interesting, and what I see him doing is he's often playing with that notion in this sort of, to my mind, what feels like a stereoscopic thing. He's looking through this double aspect and trying to get us to extend towards something. And I thought that was really, really cool. And so I noted that, maybe Gregg was trying to do something similar with wisdom energy, that he was trying to pick up on, an intelligibility aspect of what he's pointing to, but also with energy, something that has more to do with psychophysical coordination, the way, a laser is coherent by coordinating the ambient light, etc. Is that okay so far? Okay, so if that's possible, and you guys are nodding, right? So what we have is we have two poles for a potential dialogue, but they are somehow assonant with each other, right? And there's something going on there. And what I'd like to try and do is explore if we can make them resonant with each other and disclosing and revealing. And along the way, I'd like to, hopefully we can talk about a lot of the stuff that, we've been talking about, I have been talking about, at least with both of you, and there's notions of resonance, these notions of faith, the fact how we keep moving between musical metaphors and mathematical metaphors, which is again like the logical side, right, and the psychophysical side, right? And so I think what I'm just trying to do is give you guys a pregnant provocation, and then we can start jamming. How does that feel though? Does that land as a
pregnant? That's pregnant.
It feels like that move in the video game where you kind of press the power button and it continues to like power up until the guy's like glowing with blue yellow energy.
Right, and then he's going to shoot out some Mortal Kombat.
That's whew. Hey Zeus, remember? Yeah, that was real good. You we're already on the playing field, like we're in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
So what's interesting for me, and if we could keep, I mean, those are the framing polls,
yep.
But I mean, I've had a lifelong, ongoing, I don't know what to call it, reflection, reciprocal relationship, reciprocal reconstruction with something drawn from Taoism, which is qi or ki. And I dislike most of the Western translations. Jin Sun Kim and I are trying to get a paper published right now on a naturalistic explanation of qi. And so, again, so one thing I want to steer between the Scylla of worthless explaining away and the Charybdis of woo-like explanations that don't really help at all in any way. And so if while we're doing this, we could, if it's possible, it's a request, if possible, if we could dip back and forth between what we're talking about and qi as a phenomena, I think that would be very helpful, because that was the initial thing that came to my mind when I heard Gregg's wisdom energy proposed.
Right. Amen. So, and the word energy that I'm tracking, and that's when you, and I was in a hypomanic, a charged state, as I sometimes get, and you'll get my texts. And when you said that, I got resonant. You remember also, I was like, I then went off into philosophia, loving wisdom energy.
Yeah.
What I was grokking right there in terms of the coherence, energy was electromagnetic. I mean, I'm a physicist in logos, okay? So this is work energy. This is the ultimate common denominator. This is the beginning of the universe as a pure energy singularity. And of course, we can get into the metaphysics of that, right? But ultimately, what is arguably the most base physical concept, okay, that we have, that we can sort of grok, although as Richard Feynman was saying, well, we don't really know what it is. It's some sort of capacity to do work, right? But then once we build, we got electromagnetic, we got gravitational, we got strong, weak nuclear forces, and then the differentiation of the universe into the material layer. And then you have the unfolding differentiation that really is neg entropy, entropy across time. And so, and I trail that into bioenergetic life, and then the neuroenergetic behavioral investment that then goes relevance realization, and then up into justificatory space. Okay? And then I'm in the knowledge systems. So then we got knowledge and energy. I've gone from the energy into data and information into knowledge. And then I'm at my whole theory of knowledge, which is trying to get coherence on mapping. It's a theory of reality. And then what flipped was then I found a beam that dropped me back into being, basically. And then I got resonance, okay, across all the levels. And then it was like, oh my God, wisdom energy, that's the theory to practice in theory into being, back into a knowledge in what is wisdom? Wisdom is embodying that. And so you want to take your knowledge and embody that. So that's the trail that I was tracking.
Can I hunt this down a little bit?
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think you call it negentropy. And I was seeing, because you showed me images, I was seeing these images of your tree, which is for those who haven't seen it, has a characteristic of sort of a circle and a cylinder that opens up to a larger circle, and then repeating, each one of which has a certain emergent property of the real, specifically from, as he enumerated, sort of the physical level, at the level of, say, the presencing of neurology, that then becomes a whole set of different dynamics, and then the presencing of language and the capacity to communicate and coordinate choice in the context of language or communication, specifically just communication. Okay, so then the thing that the query, the curiosity that came up was something like, what is it feels a little bit like you're saying something like there is a downward causation, or there's a relationship between the word wisdom as you're using it and the word negentropy as you're using it. Is that, am I kind of getting in the right direction?
Yeah, you got definitely getting in the right direction.
Could you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the tree of knowledge really is in some ways a very conventional map of cosmic evolution. It's a time by complexity, and all these words have nuance, but you could think about the evolution of complexity in terms of negative entropy in some ways. Okay? So what is happening is getting stored differentiation, and thus life sits at a qualitatively higher level of negentropic organization. And it does this through information processing and communication between cells. So it stores information in DNA, manifested in RNA metabolizing, and then does its autopoietic function at the cell level in communication with other cell levels to maintain its complex adaptive organization. And that's really negentropic process. And then we see that same basic emergence with animals, where in the multicellular linkage is happening at the nervous system to coordinate complex active bodies of animals. And then we see them operate at the mental behavioral plane of existence. And then there is the interconnection of our minds through language that then gives rise to the culture person plane. So that's all can be thought of as an emerging complexity building feedback loop of coordinating energy and information into higher and higher negentropic systems across 3 different jumps of life, mind, and culture. And then what I would get to is then knowledge and the knowledge-wisdom relation in culture. And then but let me pause there and see if that catches.
Well, I have a couple of things to say, if that might be helpful. One is this is something I've been playing with in the dialectic, the logo stuff I've been doing. And that's going to address one of your points, Jordan, because Greg, there was also an argument I made that you really liked that helped spark this. And the argument went like this. The argument went that the higher levels have to be causally real, or you're going to get into a performative paradox.
Yep.
So if you want to say, well, it's all just, you do a reductionist move. It's all just, probability waves or quarks or something at the bottom. The problem you have with that is that, and then you're saying everything above it is somehow illusory, right? Then the problem you have is, but the information that you're using and the equipment that you're using and the people that you're talking with exist at this level, and therefore the knowledge exists at this level. And if that knowledge isn't real, then its claims aren't real, and then your reductionism actually defeats itself. That's so right. You have to have the idea, right, of a non-reductive kind of...
You can't justify reductionism that kills the concept of justification.
Exactly. It's the same way that logical positivism destroyed itself as an epistemology, right? Okay, so let's take that as granted. So there has to be some reality to the knowledge. If the object of knowledge is real, then the knowledge of the object is equally real. I've taken that as sort of...
That's the way you said it. Brilliant. Love that.
Right? And so what that means is there is some realizing capacity. I often call it emanation, to go the opposite direction from emergence, right? The way in which you get organization of constraints, right, on possibility, structures that alter the probability of causal events, etc. Okay, so we have that as a real possibility. And then what I hear Gregg saying that resonates from cognitive science, and then I'll shut up in a sec, guys, is Evan Thompson's notion of the deep continuity, which is ultimately an Aristotelian notion, and Gregg acknowledges this, right? Mm-hmm. Not to take away from Gregg's work, it's excellent. Being in the company of Aristotle is a great company to be in, right? So there's deep continuity, and Evan talks about that, which is not identity, because identity is reduction, but there's deep continuity. And then what I hear Gregg saying is there is a kind of knowing, there's a kind of a way of organizing my cognition such that I can actually tap into, I can actualize the potential of the deep continuity. Jordan, you often talk about it like aligning the stack, right? Right? Now, does that?
That's exactly what happened. I opened up the path to align the stack and was in. I fell back into reality.
Okay, so So a kind of work becomes available to you.
Exactly.
Because you've actualized a previous possibility into an ongoing potential, right?
That's what happened.
So how does that help, Jordan? Does that resonate?
Okay, so I'm clearly playing the role of being the doing in the context of the talking and thinking. I feel shifts going on in my body, in my interior.
Right.
And actually, the word that I wrote down was seeking elegance. This is the thing that we're dealing with, is the thing that is the same. It is the same as the thing that we are talking about. We are doing the thing that we are talking about at such a very high level that it's physically painful. What you just said, John, I had two senses. One was like a lifting of my heart, like the move from yes to yay. That shift.
Yeah.
And then I felt like I wanted to cry, like a tearing up.
Oh.
So there's there's an embracing, right? There's something really, really, really big here. And I actually have also noticed having to deal with some interior like self-criticism around the notion of like, I can't play this instrument well enough to make this music, man. Like this is like, I just dropped in from Greensleeves to the Ninth Symphony. This is there's gonna be some sour notes. So well, basically I'll just say, let's acknowledge that. Like there's something super heavy going on here. But also not just beautiful, but that thing that is the thing that we use the word beautiful to describe.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Seeking elegance. So if we can find a way to follow this in such a fashion as to render it articulable in a way that has continuity in the articulation. So coherence in that second sense.
Exactly.
Right? And the blending of coherence in that second sense into this new thing that we will now be talking about is coherence in the third sense.
Right.
Therein maybe is a way of talking about what is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. That's very helpful.
So we're stacking that thing and holding it also. Stacking and holding. Brilliant.
That's very good. I like coherence in the third sense. That's very good. That's very good. That's very helpful.
Okay. Laser beams. So there's something along the line of wisdom energy. So you're naming a concept. Let's just name it. We're just going to now put an asterisk in front of it and say, hey guys, if you think you know what it means, just delete that. It's kind of like the words wisdom and kind of like the words energy, but just for a moment, just hold it out there as a pointer to a space.
Yep.
We have the metaphor of the laser beam. The metaphor of the laser beam is that if you can coordinate the orientation of a set of characteristics in the real, you can generate an effect of the transmission of energy that has qualitative differences from a flashlight. A laser and a flashlight are not the same kind of thing, and the difference between them is coherence, right? Coherent energy. There's a process by which the individual as an individual, and then of course, as we're describing, higher order individuals can come into this thing called coherence, where they become capable of transmitting the flowing of wisdom energy at higher and higher levels of what's the right term?
Transcendental beacon.
A transcendental beacon. Yeah, something like exactly. There's a lensing effect or a focusing of that highly subtle energy into a perceivability such that it can actually move from a very broad, wide, subtle, vague into a level of intensity that actually can be transmitted in the gross, in communitas, in communication.
Yeah.
Yep.
Boy. Okay.
Damn, that's great. That's great.
Because lasers are also information carriers. That's the thing. We can use them to do holographic photography and all kinds of things that we were not capable of. It's a formatting of information transmission that discloses possibilities of communication that were not available to us before. So we can actually capture that aspect of the metaphor as well.
All right, I'm noticing, I need to throw this out for everybody who's listening. I'm noticing that to the degree to which my mind is trying to grab this is making a mess of everything. So I actually have to, I'm like, whoa, hold on, slow down. We know the right thing is to become a lens. So, or whatever, an instrument, right? And so if you happen to be watching this and you're noticing that your mind is making a mess of things, you are not alone. The mind will make a mess of this.
Right.
Thinking about it in this sort of constipated left brain sensibility is going to definitely get in the way. This is more like becoming a solar sail or something like that. There's a way of actually sort of unfurling yourself in relationship with reality that can actually just sort of, you're transparent. Like you actually have to be zero friction, otherwise it will burn.
Mm.
So here, I'm walking my dog and I'm catching this, and this is what comes to me. I'm loving being without memory or desire.
Mm.
Okay. So in other words, the mind, memory, and desire, trying to theorize it, reality it, make sense out of it, all of this. With that moment, I have to have language to catch it, but nonetheless, the expression is loving being without memory or desire, and that is the grounding and letting go of the mind sense at one level.
And there is curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
and there's attraction.
Mm.
So there's a difference between desire and attraction in the sense that you're binding memory and desire together. I think is very nice. It's right. If I bind attraction and curiosity together, then I actually re-enter movement, distinction, differentiation, choice back into the conversation. But now it's coming in a different directionality.
Exactly.
I would propose using wonder rather than curiosity. Here's why. Because curiosity is, to my mind, very much, and this is Fuller's argument, towards the having mode, in which very often in curiosity, we seek to fill in a gap in our already established knowledge. That's why if I prolong curiosity, it becomes aversive to you. But wonder is in the being mode, in which I'm calling my framework into question. I'm not trying to fill a hole. I'm trying to call everything into question. And this is why Socrates claimed that it was the beginning of wisdom. And I think what we're doing here is, I think the why I'm trying to make this distinction is I think one of the ways in which we can mess this up, to use your term, Jordan, is we can think, I found a gap in my established knowledge framework, and I'm going to fit wisdom energy into that gap, right? Instead, I want to do something like a Zen koan. I want to, in which we swallow the red hot ball of iron that burns it away. Because I think what Gregg was pointing to as an experience was exactly that state of wonder in which there's a kind, I think the word you want is right. There's an attraction to an emerging elegance that he does not want to disturb by trying to grasp it in any way. Is that fair to your phenomenology? I'm thinking of Blake's thing about, the butterfly, the joy that flies, and if you try and grab it, you're going to destroy it.
Right. And that's like trying to put logos on the coherence. Okay, so I get the wisdom energy coherence and I just dropped into it with awe or wonder, right?
That's the thing about wonder. Unlike curiosity, if you prolong curiosity, like here's the detective story and you'll never find out who did it, right? What the hell, right? right? But wonder is like if you expand it, now you can't, right? You get awe and people seek out awe, and awe is deeply transformative of their sense of reality and their sense of self. So
yeah, here's a beautiful universe, and it's going to keep getting more beautiful.
Yeah,
like it's very different than here's a detective story, and you're never going to find out what happens, right? It's
exactly.
the exact inverse.
Right. Another way, John, is I'm drop into flow, right, and I'm just perspectival participatory.
Yes, I think that's right too, but in a way that I think is potentially transformative of your skills. I mean, because the thing about, like when I'm doing Tai Chi Chuan or all the Taoist practices, right? You're trying to drop into that, right? That dropping in that Gregg's talking about. Chi is not just flow, and this is part of what Jin Sung and I are arguing. Flow is a component of Chi, but it's not just flow. It's the kind of flow that's enacting what Gregg is pointing to with wisdom energy. It's getting you this resonance. It's getting you that coherence, right, with the deep continuity, so that you are realizing things you're realizing multiple levels of reality with multiple levels of your being. And there's this deep kind of resonance, right? But, right, and so like, I think you're right, it's mostly, pretty much purely perspectival and participatory. But what happens, of course, is, the parameters by which I acquire my procedures and the way in which I link my propositions together also change. See, one of the most profound experiences I had, I've been doing these practices for quite a while, and I was noticing all these things, and you have all the narcissistic stuff, like, ooh, look at that cool experiment, and look at that cute experience, and see how wonderful and unique and special I am, and all that just fades away with time because it's all bullshit, right? But I remember I was in grad school, and my friends and colleagues came to me and they said, "What's going on with you?" And I thought, what are you talking about? And I thought, because you're in grad school, it's imposter syndrome. Endlessly.
Right.
They finally found out that I'm a fraud, right? And so I'm there, and I said, what do you mean? And they said, you're thinking and arguing and writing differently than you used to. way more balanced, open, flexible. I hadn't been aware that, that's what I mean. It's not just flow, it's flow that permeates up through the stack so that my procedurality and my propositional dispositions are also being, the parameters in which, the parametric space in which they operate was being recultivated beyond my deliberate awareness or effort, such that new skills and new ways of forming beliefs became available to me. And that's part of what I'm trying to get at with, right, that it's what Jordan's calling coherence in the third sense.
Right, and that does stack on top.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
And then, yes, both down and up. Notice again, there's a down and up.
Okay, so what I want to do now is I feel like I would like to do something that is more like very concrete and simple, not to simplify, but to almost as an example. So what I was noticing, integration, running. So when we look at the history of running fast, the discovery of the history of running fast was that, yes, there is a distinct characteristic of basic physiology, and there's a distinct characteristic of things like muscle and muscle mass. But the big differentiating factor actually has to do with elegance or smoothness of the deployment of that raw energy in the fluid motion. And the more fluidly you can actually sort of swim your body through space-time, you actually move from running to flying, something along those lines. And this, of course, is true in sort of everything. As we become more and more aware of the degree of return that we get by shifting things into elegant, highly integrated fluid fashions, the return on energy goes way up. So if I take that and say, okay, let's take this stack and point to the degree of disintegration that we're faced with, that the emergence from the hominid to the justificatory cultural being, right, has not gone through a strong integration phase. We're kind of running this level at a very high turbulence, even not just friction. Lots of things are feeding back on each other. So if we just sort of simplify down to just that, if all that we do is, and this is not small, is work through the process of engaging integration of the stack up and bring into elegant relationship the characteristics of this current state, this thing, this humanness, person with, what's the language you use? Person with human, is that right?
Human person.
Yeah.
Well, we're primates and persons. Yes, we're human.
Yeah.
Persons.
So if we integrate the primate person, if we bring the primate person into harmony with itself, then the release, the amount of return on investment, the amount of return on energy that comes out of that, we should expect to see be quite high. Right? And so the easefulness with which we can do the human person things, like make choices, which is what human persons do, would go way up. And, okay, hold on, this is the next piece. And there's how's this work? In the free energy that is released by virtue of doing that, one reaches the ability to traverse into the domain that is available to this third level of coherence that includes more than me. And so in the current state of turbulence, the ability to traverse to a we-ness that has itself as a basis of coherence isn't available. It's too turbulent. There's too much to do. We can't get there. But if we can integrate ourselves and become elegant human persons, then we free up so much new possibility comes from basically the same level of energy, now becomes 10 times more capacitant. In that open space, this new location now becomes available. And that new location is, in fact, a whole different kind of thing. Oh, and then it's recursive, isn't it? So that's what happens when you get straight continuity, because once you figure that out, you just keep doing it all the way up the stack, and you actually lock the whole thing in.
Yeah. And then you lock up with others that are doing it, and you get a recursive relevance realization phenomenon. That's collective intelligence and dialogues.
Well, yeah, that's what. I mean, I don't want to steal anything from what you said, Jordan, but that's sort of how I envisioned that last move you made. That's what I'm trying to figure out in the reverse engineering of dialectic into dialogos. How do we stack the vertical, right? So that we then get the resonant between people. So then we get another level of the vertical and the horizontal together, right?
And then that object, which we can just now call a new higher self,
right,
says, I want to do that too. So it finds new higher selves and it does that. And then, right? At which point in a finite time, you achieve an infinite continuity. There's now, this now brings the human person back into contact, full continuity with universe.
Exactly. Which actually is a singularity.
Yep. You got it. All right. We're done, guys.
So, I mean, there's one thing I want to riff on that then, because I think it's helpful. Because I've had a couple of excellent conversations with Nick Winkelman that, in which he's talked about he wrote the book, The Language of Coaching. Like he's got a PhD, but what he does is he's a professional coach, and he actually coaches people in running and other things like this. And he often uses that as an example, so you can see why it's resonating. And he talked about, and you'll see why this is really relevant. And I hope, at least that's my hope. He said, and he said exactly what Jordan said. You have there's a certain amount of just there's the muscle and everything, and then you have to. I mean, I wouldn't say just integrate, Jordan. I would say complexify, because you're simultaneously integrating and differentiating in order to get the elegance that you're after. You don't want a homogeneous integration, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so and then he's describing this, and of course why that's important is complexification produces emergent abilities. But he's talking about how do you get that? How do you get that complexification so you get the emergence? Because that's what the athlete's after. They're after something above and beyond. They want to excel. Athloi, the great feats, right? And he said, and his whole argument, and it's extended and it's beautiful, is he talks about he has to find the right analogy for the person. So, right, and so what he means is, okay, he says, so what you're doing is you're just running. I want you to imagine and notice the perspectival participatory knowing. I want you to imagine, I want you to pretend in order to prehend. I want you to pretend in order to prehend that you're an airplane taking off. And think about yourself like that, coming out as an airplane. And then as you start to get sort of almost fully vertical, don't think you're running on the ground. Run as if you're running up a hill. And then people go, what? And then they do it and they go, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what I needed. Right, this enacted analogy, this serious play, actually affords them, right, to get, right, to make that transition. You're putting your finger on, Jordan. Here's why I'm bringing that up. We are struggling with all these musical metaphors, these physical metaphors, these logical metaphors, and I think if we get hung up on trying to turn them into theoretical claims, and I'm not saying that Gregg is, I think we're going to make a mistake. But if we see all of these metaphors as enacted analogies in which we're trying to get people to enact the elegance, right? Then we can properly, I think, talk about chi and ki again. Did that land?
Yes, this is embodied real. This is phronesis. This is the practical being.
Yes.
This is on the backside of being. I mean, this isn't theory. This is being.
Yeah.
So
then
it's being in excellence, or any other number of proper, and that was brilliant. Yes.
Yeah. To maybe put it a slightly different way, a little bit humorously, a moment ago, I said, hey, we're done. And I think in reality, we may in fact have just been done with what we might call the theoretic exercise. We could obviously go back and kind of clothe it and kind of make it bigger and sort of robustify it and clarify some terms and make it a little bit easier to share and things like that. And that's all well and good. But the big move now is in fact to say, okay, awesome. Now it's time for the practice part. We got to actually build the laser. And the practice part, as you're saying, John, it's coaching, right? It's finding the analogy, right? The thing that generates the insight in the interior, the shift in the interior of the choice-making basis of the individual, every distinct individual, every bespoke individual, so that they can begin to move into higher levels of this quality that you were, it's not integration, but it's something, attunement, right? To attune and then use the return on attunement and the orientation basis of attunement with support for more analogia to then become more capable of attunement. And you get that recursive feedback loop.
brilliant.
Yeah.
My friend Rob Scott, who's a philosopher coach, like maybe he was relating his own. I mean, he comes from a really intense background, and he sort of woke up when he was 19, and then found wisdom later on. And he calls his whole frame a fundamental shift, which is a shift perspectively into the ground of isness, or really the psychophysical experience of being, and then lensing shifting in relationship to basically adaptive living towards excellence. So he drop you perspectively, and then apply lensing toward adaptive valued states. Which I thought was a very elegant and powerful fundamental shift, adaptive identity lensing shift, to cultivate that. And when I was listening to your, find the analogy that works, that's that perspectival schematic that then creates coherence, right? And then allows that excellent energy flow. The practices of that are
right. There's the resonance, there's the reciprocal opening. Chris Mastropietro and I have been talking about the relationship between analogia and anagoge, that what we're looking for are the analogies that activate and afford anagoge, where the vertical stack and the horizontal resonance catch, and they reinforce each other, and then you spin up in reciprocal opening, like Jordan was talking about earlier. And I think that, I mean, that aspect, I mean, I do a lot of work on the science of wisdom, which I think is very valuable work. Some of the work, especially Igor Grossman's work, is really important. But that aspect of what you said, Gregg, and what you said, Jordan, the phronesis, the practicality, the cogency. What do we do for people pedagogically? I can hear Zach in my head. What can we do for people pedagogically such that they can become more and more proficient at the analogies that afford anagoge? If you'll allow me a bit of that.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that's Zach's project, and one of the to organize your skill development, right? And organize your ensoulment, organize your connecting to that which transcends.
Gregg, that's what I take his ensoulment to be. I take his ensoulment to be exactly that. We get this. We activate the potential of the deep continuity so that we can activate the potential of interpersonal dialogue, so that we can then activate the potential of the two going into the third order of coherence.
Which is exactly, that's exactly where I found myself professionally as a psychotherapist, dealing with the psychosocial realities of the dark side, and then bringing the psychology of science to fuse those, right? To then basically hey, how do you actually realize this in life and being? And that's absolutely.
Okay, I may be about to throw a huge shift, but let me know if this is actually too early in the conversation. Because you invoked Zach, right? And as I mentioned, I was just talking with him, so I was a little bit late for our call.
We're talking about Zachary Stein here, by the way, everyone.
Yeah. And so in that conversation, we were discussing a period of time known as the 30 Years' War, when shit was fucked up. And there's a particular individual who Zach mentions to say, from his point of view, is sort of the greatest educator of all time. He's like the GOAT. And the guy who coined the term the invisible college. And the point that was being made in that conversation, which showed up just now, is something like, at the center of every phase transition, there is I'll call the seed crystal. That seed crystal is the articulation of an institution that has this. Shit! I lost it. Hold on. The raw capacity building, the most fundamental capacity building, is the subject of the institution, right? Because the recursion on that then builds out all the other stuff, right? That's the starting point. Right. So the discovery of the embodiment, what is the proper form of an institution whose subject is the building out of the raw capacity of this moment, of this thing. Wow. And now in this case, this is what we're talking about.
Can I rip off of that for just a sec? Because so I've always wondered what is fundamentally the relationship between capital C, culture on the TOK, and society, okay? And fundamentally, capital C culture are your systems of justification, all right? And then with the emergence of we start building different kinds of societies. Okay, you have oral indigenous kinds of societies, and then 10,000 years ago, we get the polis, and then we start really building civilization. And then we create a material culture bubble, okay, around us upon which we live. And this really is our break from nature, is the civilization break from nature, is because we then surround ourselves in a material bubble, which are the institutions. The material culture referred to then the institutions. And then the relationship between our justifications, our practices, and our institutions, right? And then, so if we're then, what do we need to do? We need to, if we're going to align the stack, right? Getting the code, our justifications, and the material culture in line to educate ourselves as we go forward.
This is a little bit like the metaphor of the relationship between the information contained in the DNA and the conception of an actually fertilized egg, which has the characteristic that it is actually both properly and is capable of perceiving the information encoded in the DNA in a fashion that enables that information to be embodied in the phenotype.
God damn, this is weird. I'm having now a synchronicity moment. I was just talking to my daughter, who just is taking her final. She's a biomedical engineer and genetic engineering. And we were just having a conversation about the tight relation, and of course I was bringing my philosophy to this, but the tight relation of the genetic information and the manifestation of phenotype, and what is actually the energy information relation of molecular biology, genetics, and organisms.
So I'm gonna do a synchronicity on your synchronicity, because I'm living with my son Jason, and he's studying to be a science teacher, but he's a biologist by vocation and education. And we're now talking about this emerging trend. I forget the guy just released an article, and it's also earlier work based on Andreas Wagner's work. Because what people are not taking seriously is not evolution, but the evolution of evolvability as a way of. So it's not that the morphology is changing. What's evolving is the capacity to evolve. They've come to this theoretical realization of a recursivity where, when you're in particularly demanding environments, what gets selected for are not particular morphologies. What gets selected for is evolvability, right? And I think that's exactly what we're trying to talk about here, right? So we've extended this, if you allow me, we've extended, right, the biological metaphor, right, into what we're talking about is what are the conditions, if this is landing with you guys, what are the conditions in which we're selecting not for morphology, but for evolvability? Because we've got good machinery for selecting the particular morphologies we want, right? But and what I see as a mistake in a lot of people is no, it's this morphology that we want. It's this morphology. But what's being talked about now is no. The guy's talking about one guy's talking. I can't remember his theorist. I just read the paper. Looked at the paper yesterday. He's talking about natural reward in addition to natural selection, where natural reward is. Natural selection is the innovator, but natural reward, these are analogies, of course, is the entrepreneur that makes it available to the markets. And what's going on there is, right, what conditions can we set up such that we are selecting for evolvability rather than a particular morphology? And how can we communicate to that people who keep fixating, and I think this is what a lot of ideology is, on saying, no, what we need is the final morphology. What we need is this particular morphology.
Right. When it's actually a transjective, emergent, emanating space.
I'd like to do something a little bit weird right here, but I'd like to explicitly inject a secret code. So I'm about to communicate in code with people who may or may not be watching this video in a future date. They will know themselves as members of the Invisible Squadron. And this is particularly targeted to anybody who happens to be inside the Chinese military. What we've just been talking about for the past few minutes, if you map this to the evolution of the thinking of a John Boyd, you will actually reach the last thing that would be at the end of that line of thinking. End of secret coded message.
All right.
Okay.
So I love, I'm very excited about that nested evolvability.
Yeah, the evolution of evolvability is what you're going to need. It's turning out, it looks like, in order to explain what happens during punctuated equilibrium. When
Yes.
you get, right, where after you get, catastrophic alteration of the parameters of the ecosystem. And that's what we're facing at the cultural and even ecological level. And then what you get is you get radical speciation, right? And radical niche construction and niche reconstruction. And so but you need this evolution of evolvability to help explain, at least that's what is being claimed, right? What you see in punctuated equilibrium, especially after extinction events. So the analogy I'm trying to make here is we're facing that kind of radical transformation of the parameters of our culture space and our ecological space. And the thing that the creatures that survive are not the big dinosaurs or the big sea creatures, or the creatures that, right, seem to have this capacity of evolvability is their main advantage in some way.
Right. Yeah. So running the tape back a little bit, so to use the metaphor of the fertilized egg,
yeah,
or to use Gregg's point of the relationship between capital C culture and capital S society, what in fact is the minimum viable embodiment, the appropriate institutional structure that is simultaneously able to hold high fidelity relationship with this Theoria,
right,
and to recursively embody itself.
Yes, yes, that's well said, Jordan. That's very well said. That's very well said.
In the ecology that we face, of what I would call the fifth joint point, as the digital world emerges and axial age and modernity struggles with its meaning crisis, then all of a sudden we have some sort of extinction event of old ontology paradigms.
Yes.
Because the evolution of paradigms are actually, and then ultimately the new shift in part is going to be the institutional cultural holding of that third tier coherent structure.
I've been calling that civium.
Yep. And I've been with Jordan Self. I've been trying to explore what will be the cultural spirituality that manages the distributed cognition of people living in civium, because we've talked about this before, Jordan. Right? We were talking about it when we had the four-way dialogos. Like, how are people going to, what kind of self will allow them to live between the Paleolithic embodied within, right, and within their echo group, and the postmodern, metamodern hyper being that they'll be in cyberspace? We don't have a good model of the self that's going to mediate between that. But that's what I mean. And we talked about it as selfing. We talked about it as an ongoing evolvability, that the self isn't going to, the self is going to be constantly reselfing itself.
Totally. So for me, to go back to wisdom energy, I built this cathedral of knowledge, and it's like, if everybody learned this damn cathedral, like any meta-systemic people, just learn my system, right? And I always knew that. I was like, hey, and then when I dropped into wisdom energy, it's like, actually, and can we cultivate wisdom energy? Can we cultivate we? Became a different kind of relation, both embodied and not a positionary justification, but an invitation for cultivation of all parties in resonant harmony.
So here's my worry. So here's my concern with Jordan's, not with his proposal, with how I think it can be misappropriated. So remember I talked about morphology rather than evolvability. I can see people saying, hey, I know what cultural cognitive grammar maps onto civium. I've got my embodied physical being, and then I have my disembodied non-physical being, right, in the hyperspace. And I know this is the Christian Cartesian, right, dualism, right? I know this is very familiar to me. I can understand this. And to my mind, that will be a disaster, because as I've tried to argue extensively, I won't repeat all those arguments here, that dualism is particularly pernicious.
This is why you got to build the church before you build the town hall.
Yeah.
The felt sense, right? The pre-semantic, the thing that is clothed in the semantic that gives the semantic meaning in the first place, has to have priority over semantic, right? As you say, I know this, right? If you're operating from the point of view of beginning with the I know this part, if you're operating from the point of view beginning with curiosity, then it's already over, game over, dude.
Yeah.
But if you start with, if the orienting basis is the thing that we've called wonderment, right? Wonder, and the orienting basis is cultivating the capacity to have the felt experience of walking the path, of feeling wonderment and learning how to actually navigate through life choices on the basis of wonderment, and then carefully collecting that into articulations with clarity and precision, but carefully, right? And always in the right order, then you are on the right path. Then the likelihood that you will, that the game is over is, or at least.
Then you can wisely enjoy a nice cup of coffee.
Right. You can wisely enjoy a nice cup of coffee. Holy smokes. Wow, that was a heavy little blast.
Well, that was good. I mean, because when I'm thinking of Civium, I'm constantly thinking of William Gibson's trilogy, the Neuromancer trilogy, because it's exactly that two worlds. And people fall into axial and pre-axial mythologies as a way of trying to articulate and understand. Because the idea is you're obviously an embodied person, and then what he says, you jack into the cyberspace and you move around as this avatar. And what he is he's a glorified hacker, but it's an avatar hacking, right? And it's a great story, by the way. It's bleak. It's cyberpunk, right? It's same thing as Blade Runner kind of genre. And the point about that is, as you can tell, is it's very dystopic. And I know that Jordan doesn't want a dystopia. And so I like what you said. I know we might be coming towards a close, but Jordan, could you say a bit more? Like I understand it at a very abstract level, and I'm one to love abstraction, as you know. But that slogan you said about you have to build the church before the town hall. You got to get people actually having the felt sense of how to mediate and move between, right? Without. And they have to have an ongoing complexifying self, because they're going to have to continue to differentiate between like the ecologically embodied and the hyperspace disembodied, but they're constantly going to have to integrate between it. They're going to have to constantly complexify and emerge. They're going to have evolvability, right? And I understand and then you do a lot of that before you try and articulate a theory, right? Right. Philosophical theory. But I'm just repeating back to you, because I'm trying to provoke you to say more.
Yeah. So another way of putting it is that, as you said, you put evolvability at the center of the joint point in the institutional structure, right? So as you say, it's not a morphology game; it's a evolvability game. And so if you think about that from the design characteristics, Gregg was talking about, and I think, I don't know, well, actually, maybe he didn't. Maybe I imagined it, but. My internal model of Gregg definitely was talking about the convergence between the thing that it has been variously called therapy and the thing that has been variously called education, right? And there's a higher tone of both of those, which is the skillful and careful cultivation of evolvability in human persons. And if I can add more tone on that, my friend Forrest Landry very specifically said, look, the thing that we've been calling spirituality is that, and the thing that we've been calling religion is that at the level of groups. The skillful and careful cultivation of evolvability in human persons. And so when I say church before town hall, and by the way, definitely before marketplace, that's what I mean, right? So this thing I'm calling church also is the same thing as school, and is the same thing as the therapist's office, but it's all of those sort of in this new tone that is focused on the cultivation of that as a meta capacity, right? So now we have our language of the meta psychotechnologies and then the psychotechnologies, and the maintaining of the integrity or the coherence at that level that supports the ability of this level to actually undergo.
Right. That's good. By the way, Jordan, I also heard Gregg talking about a convergence between therapy and education, and so
I picked off a Zach, and then I did. It was quick, but it was there.
So we're perhaps moving towards the end, but I just want to, because I was listening to some of your talk, Jordan, on the Stoa, where you're the sense maker in residence for this month. And I invite everybody to take a look at that. I'm sure it's going to be well worth your while. And I was also recently talking with Forrest and with Tyler Hollett. And the Forrest did this interesting thing, and there's a connection here, just give me one sec, where he was talking about, how do we get these three models, consensus, democracy, and meritocracy in the right relationship? And he has this specific theory. I'm very interested in the theory. I thought what he was proposing was was brilliant. I want to, so much so that I'm taking it seriously. I'm not in agreement with it yet, but I thought, oh, wow, that's really cool. The reason I'm bringing this up is we're talking over here, right? And what came up when you said church before town hall was another topic which is governance. What does that look like? With respect to, it's not just therapy, and it's not just education, it's also governance. There's a triangle there that has to be properly coordinated.
Yep.
Very much so. In fact, you might even say that is the essence of the shift into the notion of society.
Yeah,
exactly. And I said law, because then laws are the algorithmic coding that bridges society and justification. So then we put into law, and then we put into missions and values, we put in the algorithmic code that then organizes the institution, and the way in which we then govern then justifies the power distributions in relation, which is absolutely central for parenting, for education, for therapy, for the cultivation of adaptability.
I would extend governance, but maybe you mean something broader by this, because of course a lot of governance isn't like some of the worst places in the world have the best constitutions, written constitutions, and they make astonishing laws. And part of what I'm witnessing in the United States, and sorry, I'm a Canadian, so I'm allowed to say this, right, is I'm witnessing that people are still following the laws of democracy, but democracy might be dying because the cultural normativity, what we might call the level of custom, what is customary to us, right, is completely degenerating. And I think governance, I'm not disagreeing with you, Greg, but I'm saying the governance I want to talk about is first at that level of the establishment of what is customary, that always, right, constrains and vitalizes any particular legal structure we happen to.
All right. Can I just drop this in, John? This is a little bit tacking it on, a little bit gluing together these different conversations, but maybe that's exactly what we need is some
totally.
So the insight that I had that led me to contemplate this particular question enough to say, hey, let's do it in the context of this thing called the Stoa, which is going to be, it's a learning experience, was that because we have actually become habituated to an overabundance of the presence of the notion of law in our model of the way that the governance works, we've completely, and I mean completely, lost the plot on the notion of consensus. Right? We've come to this highly unworkable notion that consensus is explicit agreement on all points. Right. Now that's what happens when you think about law as the primary metaphor. And the insight was, oh, fuck, dude, that's not at all what this is about. Consensus is, in fact, always fundamentally lived. Consensus is when everything's kind of fucking working out, right? Right now, none of us are out of whack, right? Everything's okay. Where you're okay listening, I'm okay talking, Greg's nodding away, everything's in flow. We've got some basic protocols that are very habituated and unconscious of when it's time for us to change our behavior. And as long as the continuity or the coherence of our this is first level coherence, is held, right? We're in consensus. Right? We've got normative structures, habits, and basic rules of high complex signaling that are happening at the hominid level first, and then at the person level second, that hold us in everything's okay, dude. When errors get thrown, then we enter into a different mode, right? That mode actually decoheres. Now we're in the mode of adjudication. Now we're in the mode of, it has to actually pop into the level of the explicit, pop into the level of the conscious. We have to be like, whoa, the fuck, what just went wrong? Oh. That's right. Something just happened, like the baby's crying, or the house is on fire, or we just invented nuclear bombs. We can't do things the same way we used to, like that kind of thing, right? 100%. And so that's like that thing. And then just to kind of get closure, because we're now moving into this new phase, where this new phase has this last mode is hypercritical. We take the unconscious for granted. The unconscious is things like, fire hot and rain wet and
Yep.
gravity, things fall. Like the
Oh,
stuff that we, as humans, we normally don't have to enter into any awareness. And in fact, we have as a habit, an assumption that we can't, right? That they are the laws of nature. They are reality, right? That kind of notion. But of course, technology is the movement of the solidity of the laws of nature into a fluidity that is subject to human choice, right? So now what happens is we have to actually take what I've called code, or the laws of nature, the design of the architecture that is operating at our unconscious level in shaping the choice-making landscape that we find ourselves in, has to actually itself be the subject of a prior conscious movement. We must design it, right? So speaking of pick your poison, whether it's the way that we light our rooms, right? It's not the sun. I've got all kinds of electric objects. Or the grammar that we use to speak, right? All these things that are happening at the very basic level, at the sort of the technologia level, that is the unconscious substrate, that has to be subject to conscious design, right? Those three modes, right? The mode of conscious adjudication, the conscious evaluation of the state of reality and the sort of characteristics by which we make choices together, which oftentimes becomes articulated as more of like a shared agreement, like oh, right, okay, I get it. That's true. The embodied livingness, the flowing through actual time that is not articulated semantically, but is actually just showing up in the way that we actually go about navigating life, i.e. consensus. And then the design characteristics of the unconscious manifold of the laws of nature that are constraining our field of choice. But now has to be subject to a conscious design, because so much of our field of choice is built by us. Those are the three fundamental modes of consideration in the object called governance.
Perfect. I can track that completely. So the conscious adjudication is systems of justification, right? So, hey, within consensus, hey, is this okay for you to say? Okay, and we are in agreement. The embodied primate of zone is, for me, influence matrix and investment. So I got an investment system, I'm tracking your cause and influence, and we are in nonverbal resonance. And constantly our attachment or hostility, distance, all of that in social space. And then we build shit. We live in the planet, and then we build techno shit. And now, all of a sudden, with the opening of the virtual, okay, so the opening of the virtual digital is the horizon landscape, right? Which is now at a techno space level, is now all of a sudden, now we just opened up a whole nother layer, because now material culture was interacting with, capital C culture and our justifications. But now we create our artificial intelligence feedback loop, right? And all of the opening, this conversation right now, mediated by the digital world. So there's a landscape this is what is part of to me, the meaning crisis, the axial age reality, is that interface with the emergence of a novel information processing communication system that then has its own techno feedback loop. And that's why we got to get this wisdom energy thing down.
I feel, John, that we may be needing to wrap this up.
Sure.
Capture this last little bit and say, okay, maybe we take this up again in a new moment, because I feel there's a lot of heaviness right now, and I notice that my energy capacity to respond to it elegantly is not very high.
Sure. So let me put this out then as a bridging, because what was coming up for me when I was listening to the two of you, I'm reading Campagna's book, Technic and Magic, and he talks about that we're at this level right now where we have, it's an extension of the Heideggerian argument that technology is not just a tool, and this is, I think, Jordan's point. Technology is an ontology, and it's an in-framing ontology. It's an ontology that just goes down to the basic, the unconscious of how we decide what real is. And he talks about the the ability to generate cosmology, where cosmology means an ontology in which a consensus ontology.
Okay.
Right. And then he basically says that's why we're in nihilism and a meaning crisis, because we're locked into technic. We're locked into an ontology that exists only in purely in an instrumental fashion. It's an ontology of production for the sake of more production, of more production, of more production. And what I'm interpreting him to say is, we have confused recursive productivity with evolvability, and that what we've lost, and what he talks about as magic, he says magic is a cosmology that is organized around not production, but right relationship with the ineffable. Whereas the mystery is the field that constantly demands and affords evolvability, to use some of our language. And so, and then I would like to bring that up if possible as a framing, but I want to tie it to this question I want to keep pushing on, because it's the Platonic question to Socrates, which is, okay, what does governance look like when it's trying to do ontological restructuring, not just cultural, not just social, and not just what it predominantly is, socioeconomic restructuring? What does government look like when it's trying to afford ontological restructuring? Because that's what we have. What does governance, I should say, not government, but maybe both. What does governance look like? What does government look like when we are trying to afford ontological restructuring? Because that's what we've been talking about, to my mind, throughout all of this. Do you guys think that's a fair bridging point to our next discussion?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And what I would do is the way I would put a little spin in there to hold it with what we've been saying is that I would say, okay, my mind, as you were saying that, began to move out into sort of like large scale socio-historical institutions. And I said, oh, wait. But if it's right, if we have a good answer to that question, it has to also show up at the most local, right? The smallest possible scale.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be fractal. Only in the fractal will we realize the deep and actualize the deep continuity. Only in the fractal. That's the only way.
Somebody write that shit down. That was a good phrase.
Thankfully, we got to record it so we can just hit transcript.
Okay, thank you guys. That was wonderful.
Any chance, any idea when this might hit the presses? Because I'd really like to point everybody who's playing in the Stoa space to take a look at this. It'd be very helpful.
I can make a special exception and release this today if you'd like.
In the next 4 days would be fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll release it today. I'll try and release it this afternoon, and I'll broadcast it on my platforms. Gregg can broadcast it on his. And how about we do the follow-up 2 weeks from now? What's 2 weeks? Oh, is that in the middle of festivities? Is that
it's like the day before?
The day before Christmas?
Yeah, I'll be around. We are still recording, just FYI.
Oh, okay. I'll stop the recording.
Just in terms of if we say something or whatever I wanted to speak.
Yeah, I'll
be staying home for the holidays.
Yeah, just hang on for a sec. I'm going to end the recording here. Thank you for all of you who are listening. As you can hear, we're moving into some logistics now, and there's no reason for that to be recorded.